Thabit bin Qais, Ja'far bin Abi Talib, Jahm bin Sa'ad, Juhaym, Hatim, Hudayfa, Hussein, Handala, Khalid bin Sa'id, Khalid bin al-Walid, Az-Zubayr bin al-Awwam, and the list goes on and on. We have the scribes that Prophet had to write the Quran down. So from the very moment the Quran was revealed, the Quran were written down, as the Quran tells us in another place also. So what happened then? How did we get the Quran? During the time of the Prophet, was the Quran collected in the one book?
No.
Was it compounded into a bound book?
In a codex, no.
Okay, why was that the case?
Because the revelation was continuously coming down and the cutting and pasting process didn't exist at the time. So revelations were coming down randomly for different chapters with different verses. So the process of revelation was sealed forever after the death of the Prophet. It was necessary to codify the Quran in one codex between two covers, as we know books today. And that's why it was done after the death of the Prophet, because the revelation had ceased to come down.
As the Quran was revealed, there was no need to put in a bound book, because it's a continuous form of revelation. So during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, people had their own writing of the Quran, whether it be in the shoulder bones of a camel or a goat, or in the palm leaves or on stones, as Adnan already mentioned. People had transcription of the Quran in written form. When the Prophet ﷺ passed away, still immediately there was no need to hurry and rush together to bind the Quran under a cover. It was only a crisis that happened to the Muslim world that the need was immediately felt to bind this book. What was that crisis?
That crisis was when different people had embraced Islam from different cultures, from different lands, such as
Battle of Yamama.
the Battle of Yamama. That was the first crisis, of course.
And what happened there?
70 of the Prophet's companions who had learned the Quran directly from the Prophet, they had that authority, that necessary authority, that useful authority from the Prophet to teach the Quran. They had been killed in this battle, in the Battle of Yamama. And after they were killed, the need was felt to take the Quran from these authorities as it was given to them by the Prophet and to codify it in a book form.
Precisely. So the need was understood because a large number of the Qurra, the reciters of the Quran, the memorizer of the Quran who learned directly from the Prophet, were getting martyred. That's why it was then directed to the Khalif Abu Bakr at that time, radiallahu anhu, to gather the Quran under a particular bound book called the Mushaf. So let us now explain to you the difference between the Quran and what is the Mushaf. The Quran is whatever Allah has revealed and it's recited to the Prophet ﷺ through Angel Gabriel, and reciting which was worship. That is the Quran, which differentiates between Hadith Qudsi.
Yes.
But the Mushaf is a description of this Quran when it's transcribed on something like paper or parchment or anything in a physical form. So that's why we call it as a Mushaf. So the Quran was around. The Mushaf, the single Mushaf, was taken as an initiative during the Khalif Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu as an official enterprise, as an official policy. So what happened then? Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, he got Hyde bin Thabit radiallahu anhu to perform this task of gathering the Quran. Now one may ask, why was this the need for? Because Hyde bin Thabit himself, was he not a memorizer of the Quran?
And also a scribe of the Quran.
He himself had his own copy that he transcribed. So did Abu Bakr and Uthman and various other companions. So what was the need to get several companions to come together to put one Mushaf as an official enterprise? It is for this reason of posterity. Suppose Zayd bin Thabit, one individual companion, radiallahu anhu, he got his copy transcribed and copied in multiple forms,
Yes.
and transmitted and distributed. One of you might ask today, but that is one man, one individual. What about the rest of the people who transcribed the Quran from the Prophet? Is it possible that there are more or less from the other Prophet or other companions? Is it possible that there are differences between his particular copy that is made compared to the others? So to remove the doubt from the posterity like us and the people in the future, this is the form, the highest form of textual criticism, people. Guaranteeing the authenticity of using the best and the most authentic material, so that we have no doubt in the preservation and transmission of the Quran. Because every single piece that was written down during the time of the Prophet ﷺ
In his presence.
is as weighty as everyone else that was writing that time. They are the primary witnesses. You can't neglect them. So they are brought together as a community project, and then they were collected together and wrote down from them as a collective consensus, so that we know it is not a one-man transmission of the Quran. It is what the companions together, all together, they agreed upon, that this is the Quran the Prophet ﷺ left behind.
And it was done as a policy advised by the Caliph himself, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. He gave specific instructions to Zayd to accept parchments or material written in the presence of the Prophet, in the presence of two witnesses, and then put it down in the Mushaf. Now we know that Zayd had memorized the Quran in its entirety directly from the Prophet. He knows exactly what the content is. But Abu Bakr gave him specific instructions, as pointed out by Brother Mansur, for the confidence of posterity, that you pen down the Quran in this codex. When people bring the parchment or the material written in the presence of the Prophet with two witnesses, and this was the condition, this was the rule, Zayd bin Thabit followed, strictly followed, and he was able to collect all of the Quran except one verse. And what one verse was that?
This is the end of Surah Tawbah.
The last verse of Surah 9, he knew it is part of the Quran because of his memorization, but could not find a written copy of it with a companion. And only one man came forward. His name was Abu Khuzaymah al-Ansari. Abu Khuzaymah came forward with these verses written down as one man, and Zayd knew that this is part of the Quran, but he needed another witness. But Abu Khuzaymah, amazingly, was a man to whom the Prophet had said previously that your testimony is equal to two Allahu Akbar. Why? Because once the Prophet ﷺ did a business deal, and when he agreed to terms, he went away to get the money. When he brought the money back to complete the deal, the man who was the other party, he said the deal is over. We do not have a deal. He went back on the deal because someone offered him more money. And then he asked the Prophet, do you have witnesses to our deal? And the Prophet said, I don't have witnesses. Abu Khuzaymah was listening. And he said, oh, the Prophet of Allah, I am your witness. And the Prophet said to him, how can you be my witness when you were not there? Abu Khuzaymah said, we testify to something more difficult than this, which is the revelation itself, that Jibreel brings down this revelation. We testify to that. How can we not believe you in this? And the Prophet said, Abu Khuzaymah, because of your iman, because of your belief in me, your testimony is equal to 2. And this was Abu Khuzaymah who brought the last verses of Surah At-Tawbah, and his testimony was accepted as 2. Allahu Akbar.
So now we realize the Quran that was compiled under one book in the Caliphate of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, it was done through these meticulous conditions so that Muslims and non-Muslims alike in the posterity, in the future, like today or in the future, that we will have no doubt that this is authentically transmitted from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this book was compiled and it was kept with the Caliph. And after he passed away, by the way, it wasn't necessary at this stage to even transcribe it and distribute it to all the Muslim areas. Why? Because the companions were alive. The Quran was a living memory as they are reading from their own Quran. It was done precisely for a reason, so that for whatever reason, if the Quran, the companions who memorized the Quran were martyred, we already have got the whole of the Quran combined under one bound book, agreed upon by this Muslim community that this is what the Quran is from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You can then transcribe it from that. So that was left with the Khalif. After his death, it went to the second Khalif, and then it went to the third Khalif,
Uthman.
But with this, it went into Hafsa, right? Hafsa, and she kept this after the death of Umar radiallahu anhu. There was another crisis in the Muslim world, which then started to collect the Quran and transmit it by what? Distributing it. What was that crisis? That was the crisis when in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, Muslims were reciting. But before this, let us just explain a little bit more. What was the Prophet's method of teaching the Quran? He would send a particular companion to a particular area to teach the Quran. Do we know some of the names?
Yes. We know Muaz bin Jabal, we have Abdullah bin Masud, and we have others like them, Ubay bin Ka'b. So there are people like them who were sent to different places to teach the Quran to different people.
And the people were learning the Quran from them. One thing that Muslims even have difficulty in understanding is because they do not study enough. And this talk, let it be an inspiration for you to study our own religion, our own deen. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he transmitted the Quran to the ummah. Some of them who are weak, young and old, and those of them who did not know how to read or write. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them the Quran in sab'at ahruf, in 7 ahruf. What are the ahruf? What do the scholars say about what the ahrufs are?
There are differing opinions about the ahruf. Ahruf, as we understand them, was different modes for different people. So the Arabs, as we know, were a rigid people in the language. Some of them initially didn't even accept the fact that a prophet came from the Quraysh. For example, when the Prophet went to the city of Hyde, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to preach to them, they asked him, why didn't God, Allah, send us a prophet from among ourselves, from the tribe of Banu Thaqif? Why the Qurayshis? So there was this tribal pride or tribalism in the Arabs, and it was difficult for them to accept the language of one tribe, let alone the revelation in that language. So for that reason, these variations, tribal variations or dialect variations were allowed in the form of these different modes. That's why the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were teaching the Quran to different people at different times and different places, considering their tribal variations in language, considering the dialects. So there are different opinions, differing opinions on the matter of ahruf. What we know today, that ahruf were slight variations in the text of the Quran. These variations were what? There were sometimes synonyms. For example, a word was used for something, another tribe would use a different word for the same meaning. So these variations were allowed so that they can easily learn the Quran despite the tribal pride and the tribal differences. But after Uthman's coming to power, when in his time an issue arose in Azerbaijan, when these variations still survived in the readings of the new converts to Islam. There were new people who had come to Islam from Egypt, from Iraq, and from Yemen. Obviously, they were very rigid in the readings because they were taught by different companions in slightly different modes. So they started to dispute with each other on the content of the Quran, on its reading, on these variations. That's when Hudayfa bin Yaman, one of the companions of the Prophet, came back to the Caliph Uthman, told him about the problem, that those variations are still being read by people and we no longer need them anymore. Islam has become powerful. People of the Arabian Peninsula have embraced Islam. Now we need to put the Quran in one dialect, in one reading, in one language, and that's the language of Quraysh. So the companions of the Prophet were gathered by Uthman bin Affan, the third caliph, and he asked them for this idea. He asked them what they think of this idea. They all agreed unanimously that we should render the Quran into one dialect, one mode, which is the Qurayshi language, the Qurayshi dialect. And for that reason, Uthman chose a committee of companions of the Prophet to do the task.
Yeah. So there are 4 individuals who was involved in transcribing the Quran so that that can be a unified book throughout the whole of the Muslim region. Every part of the Muslim globe, you can call it, Muslims read it without any differences. Because when the Muslims were reciting in Azerbaijan, the Muslim army, they were saying, my recitation is better than yours. Because they didn't understand that you can't really say this because they're new converts. My recitation is better than yours, and they were quarreling. Which is, of course, you can't disagree with the content of the Quran. So what Uthman radiallahu anhu said, he sent to get the suhuf that was made and kept with Hafsa radiallahu anha.
The first one.
The first one that was already done and kept. Bring it down. And then we can make perfect copies of it and return this one back to you. So Hafsa sent it to Uthman radiallahu anhu, who ordered Zayd bin Thabit,
Again,
Abdullah bin Zubayr, Sa'id bin al-As, and Abdurrahman bin al-Harith bin Hisham to make duplicate copies. And he told the 3 Qurayshi men. Zayd bin Thabit was not Qurayshi.
not Quraysh. He was from Medina.
So he told the 3 Qurayshi men, should you disagree with Zayd bin Thabit on any point regarding the Quran, write it in the dialect of the Quraysh as the Quran was revealed in their tongue. So they did so. And when they had prepared several copies, Uthman returned the suhuf to Hafsa. So this is how the Quran was, for the second crisis, compiled together, and it was tried with very meticulous thinking, subhanallah, to unify the Muslim ummah in one particular recitation. Call it reading. They were written even though the knowledge of